The Once and Future Present, Episode 3, How Historians Know What They Know, an AP European History podcast brought to you by Hammer History Productions. Welcome back to the Once and Future Present. I'm Casey, and in today's episode, we're exploring a question that came up for me after our last conversation about historical thinking. How do historians actually know what they know? We're pulling again from History, a very short introduction, by John H. Arnold, and from The Methods and Skills of History, a Practical Guide, by Sally Voris and Ferre. These books have been super helpful in class for breaking down the historian's process. I'm joined again by my teachers, Professor Theo and Dr. Morgan. Let's get started. Okay, so last time we talked about how historians interpret the past using the 5 C's of historical thinking. But now I'm wondering, what do they start with? Like, what's the raw material they're working from, Professor Theo?
Great question, Casey. The foundation of all historical study is evidence, what we call sources. We generally divide these into 2 categories: primary sources and secondary sources.
Primary sources are direct pieces of the past: letters, speeches, laws, paintings, census records, diaries. They're produced by people at the time we're studying, and they come in a lot of forms, not just text. Historians work with all kinds of materials. Text-based sources might include newspapers, personal correspondence, government records, legal documents, advertisements, even graffiti. But we also use non-textual sources. Paintings, photographs, maps, architecture, coins, clothing, and tools, these can all tell us a lot. For example, a photograph might show us fashion, urban layout, even social dynamics. A broken plate from a dig site can tell us about trade routes, diets, or social class. These physical artifacts are crucial, especially when we study groups who didn't leave written records.
Secondary sources are written after the fact, often by historians, and they analyze or interpret the primary ones.
Okay, so like a soldier's letter from World War I is a primary source, but a book analyzing that letter is a secondary source, right, Dr. Morgan?
Exactly. Though interestingly, the same source can be used in different ways. That letter might be a primary source in one project, but in another, a historian writing about that soldier's interpretation of the war might treat it more like a commentary.
So it's not just what a source is, but how it's being used.
Right. Context matters. That's already one of our 5 C's showing up.
Where do historians find these sources? Like, are there giant basements filled with old scrolls and books?
In a way, yes. They're called archives. Archives are places that collect and preserve primary sources. Some are public, like the National Archives. Others are private, university libraries, even family collections. And the process of organizing and accessing those materials is a whole field in itself.
We read in Arnold's book that some archives only exist because of chance. For example, many medieval records survived because monasteries stored them in dry, protected buildings. But other stories, especially of marginalized groups, weren't written down or saved. Those silences are important too.
That reminds me of our reading on libraries. I was surprised by how many records don't survive. Fires, wars, just people not thinking something was worth saving.
Exactly. History is uneven. We don't have a complete record, and the things we do have often reflect the perspectives of the powerful, those who had access to literacy, paper, or authority.
So, historians are kind of detectives working with a case file that's missing half the pages?
That's a great metaphor. Yes. And sometimes they have to guess what's missing based on what's there, what's emphasized, what's avoided, what's silent.
We call that reading against the grain, paying attention to what a source doesn't say just as much as what it does. This is where bias and perspective come in.
Okay, wait. Let's slow down for a second. What do you mean by bias? Like, when someone's lying?
Not necessarily lying. Bias means that a source reflects a particular point of view. It might be honest, but it's always shaped by the writer's perspective, goals, and the world they live in.
Think of a medieval law that punishes idle women. It tells you something about how women were viewed, but not necessarily what women were doing. The source reflects elite male anxiety more than reality.
So you can't just take a source at face value. You have to ask who made it, why, and for whom.
Exactly. In our activity on reading history, we talked about external and internal criticism. External criticism asks, is this source authentic? Internal asks, is it reliable? And how should we interpret what it's saying?
This is kind of blowing my mind. Like, I thought history was about finding the facts, but it's more like piecing together a story from partial clues.
And that's why historical thinking is so important. You're not just reading, you're analyzing.
So how do the 5 C's help when you're dealing with a messy archive or a biased source?
Let's walk through them. Start with contextualization. You need to know the world the source came from. What beliefs, institutions, and assumptions shape the writer?
Causation comes in when you ask, why was this source created? What triggered it? What does it respond to?
Change in continuity helps when comparing sources over time. Are ideas shifting? Are some beliefs stubbornly sticking around?
Complexity reminds us to avoid simple answers. A document might be sincere and manipulative at the same time. People contradict themselves.
And contingency asks us to consider what didn't happen. What if the source had been written by someone else? What if a fire hadn't destroyed that record?
So all 5 C's are like lenses to look at evidence. They help historians make meaning.
Exactly.
Can we talk about this idea of historical memory? I saw that phrase in one of our readings and I didn't totally get it.
Great question. Historical memory is how societies remember the past, through monuments, textbooks, holidays, even films. It's not the same as academic history. Memory is selective. It simplifies, it celebrates, sometimes it forgets on purpose.
For example, think about how the American Civil War gets remembered. States' rights often gets mentioned more than slavery, even though slavery was central. That's memory shaping the story.
So history and memory aren't the same?
Not at all. Historians try to work with evidence and acknowledge complexity. Memory is often more emotional, more political. That's not always bad, but it's different.
It's one reason we studied history on film. A movie might teach us something, or it might reinforce a myth. Either way, it shapes how people understand the past.
Okay, so if I'm watching a historical movie now, I should be thinking, whose memory is this? And what sources is this based on?
Exactly. You're thinking like a historian.
One last thing. In class, we did that activity on different kinds of evidence. Not just documents, but stuff like art, oral traditions, even buildings. Do historians use those too?
Absolutely. That's called material culture. A painting or a piece of clothing can be just as informative as a diary, sometimes more. Historians work with whatever's available.
And the kind of evidence you use depends on your question. If you're studying working-class women in 19th century France, there might be no diaries, but there might be police reports or factory records.
So history is kind of like creative problem solving with real consequences.
I couldn't have said it better.
Thanks, both of you. This really changed how I think about where history comes from.
We're glad to hear that.
Next time on the Once and Future Present, we'll be stepping back from specific events to talk about something a little different, how historians interpret history through different lenses. We'll introduce major schools of historical interpretation, like Marxist, analyst, empirical, and more. These perspectives shape the kinds of questions historians ask and how they use evidence. Until then, you can check out our music albums for AP Euro. Just search Hammer History Productions on YouTube or Spotify. And as always, stay curious and think critically.